Well, good afternoon. Welcome to our final audio and video lecture for Management 425. And we will get to this very quickly here. Sorry, I had my slides out of whack. We are going to discuss Chapter 16, Organizational Goals and Structures, and then we'll follow up with Chapter 17, which discusses technology, strategy, and organizational learning. So let's look at the questions we hope to answer in this session. What are the different types of organizational goals? What are the hierarchical aspects of organizations? How is work organized and coordinated? And finally, what are bureaucracies and what are their common forms? The first topic we want to discuss this evening is societal goals. And as you look at this, these bullets on this slide, the first one tells the outside world. Remember, we've talked about two environments, internal environment and external environment. We're talking about the external environment now. This is what we will do. And don't take this to be hard-nosed, and I don't want it to be that way because it might come out that way. And because we told you and what we're about, and we received agreement from you, we can claim certain rights, and that's what we intend to do. And the rights, notice here, talks about claim over certain types of resources, etc. Now, this I want to point out here. This does not mean an either-or type thing. And this doesn't mean that the organization or an organization is telling people, well, this is the way it's going to be, and you don't have any choice in the matter. That might have happened in the United States for a long period of time, but certainly hasn't pretty much happened after the end of World War II. I'm not so sure how long it existed before that, but we talked about in this course about a little bit about social responsibility and ethical actions, etc. Pardon me, and we worked a number of different ethics and OB scenarios that talked about how organizations treated people or the environment or something, mostly about people. And as most of you have pointed out and said through your various and sundry postings, we want organizations to be ethical. We want them to treat people ethically. And so we're saying to organizations, yes, okay, you can have a claim on these resources, but we expect you to be wise stewards of the environment. I think I've said in this course, and if I haven't, I'm going to say it again. We only have one environment. All of the resources that we have are finite. Now, we might say oxygen and hydrogen and a few of those things, gaseous elements in our atmosphere, pardon me, may not be finite. I would submit to you they probably are, but they're not as finite as petroleum and natural gas and a few of those other things. So we have these things, and we want people to be wise stewards and to use these resources wisely. So this is what societal goals are, and then there's claim on resources. But notice down here at the notes down at the bottom, which I have not added, but they were down here. By contributing to the larger society, then the organization has a better claim on the things that it wants to be able to use. Pardon me. The slide that we have here talks about an organization's mission and mission statement. And this tells the outside world who we are, why we are what we are, and who benefits. And we're going to tell people about the services or products that we're going to deliver to the general public. And a mission statement should be rather clear and should set up for people the things that it wants the general public to understand about that. Now, we're going to look at two mission statements here. When I can get my slide to move over, I'm sorry. We're stuck here for some reason, and I'm not sure why. Well, let's see if we can move down here. There we go. Now, there are two mission statements here. One from Aflac, the insurance company that everybody associates with the duck. And then the other one is Harley-Davidson. And notice what Harley-Davidson says at the beginning, that they fulfill dreams through the experience of motorcycling. Now, I'm not a motorcyclist. I've never owned a motorcycle. I think I may have ridden on one. It's not something that I want to do. But a few years ago, my wife and I lived on what used to be a country road. Is no longer. Lots of subdivisions going up around there. Our home was a lot older than most of the subdivisions. But almost every weekend, especially Friday and Saturday, sometimes, especially Saturday and Sunday, sometimes Friday nights, there would be all sorts of motorcyclists on this road because the road lent itself, because it was an old country road, lent itself to motorcycling. It had some hills and some curves and some bends and some dips and swales and a few other type things. And these people thoroughly enjoyed it. And so this is what Harley-Davidson saying. We fulfill dreams. And it isn't saying that we sell motorcycles. It does say that if you look far enough into the mission statement. We fulfill dreams. And so it is grabbing, if you will, the people who are interested in motorcycling. This is a hook. And if you're interested, we've got what you need. Then following along here, we have things that are what are known as systems goals. Systems goals are internal and provide a blueprint, if you will, about what needs to be done. And we look here about some of the things that it talks about: growth and productivity and stability and harmony and flexibility and a few other type things. This is what we need to do inside the organization to make the organization work, so we can interface with and provide goods and services to the outside environment. Now, these are what well-defined systems goals can do. Notice it places the focus. It focuses managers and supervisors on the things that need to be accomplished. Allows flexibility, and we're going to talk about flexibility a little bit later on, but it allows that. And notice the final one. It's the basis, or it's used as the basis for dividing work. Who's supposed to do what, when, where, how, and why. So these are goals, and you have to have both of them. You have to have societal goals, and then you have to have systems goals. Organizations have to know how to work internally before they can do anything externally. Now, every organization, whether we like it or not, even those organizations that we know today champion the new workplace. Fewer rules, fewer regulations. Everybody has a PC on his or her desk, and we operate that way, and we don't need to be hamstrung. But we have organizations today that people come in what's known as casual work dress. So they want to have a tie on like I do. I'm old school, and I don't apologize for that, and I like to wear ties. Uh, but a tie is, I guess, in a way, I'm just taking this time. A tie, in a way, I guess, is a status symbol. I don't look at it like that. I look at it as a part of dressing up uh, and uh, and looking the part that I think I'm supposed to be. Now, there are others who will tell you that you don't have to do that. You don't have to wear a tie or a jacket or something else to be a college professor. And I won't disagree with that. When I was in postgraduate school at Virginia Tech, uh, most all of my core professors uh, did not wear a tie. Occasionally they would. If usually with some meeting going on, they would wear a tie. The gentleman who started out to be my uh, advisor and was supposed to be chair of my dissertation committee, and I say supposed to be because after I was there a while, he went on what's known as quarter time. He was still working there, but not full time. So being in that status, he can no longer be the chair. I don't think I ever saw Ron in a tie. So it's kind of those types of things. But regardless of whether we dress up, if this is considered to be dressed up, but I would tell you it's not because I have a sport jacket on, I don't have a suit on. Uh, Organizations have rules and policies and procedures and things, and they have to have those because people need some type of structure to do certain things. That doesn't mean to say they can't work by themselves. That doesn't mean to say they have to be led around by a ring that's riveted through their nose. That doesn't mean that. It means that there has to be some rules about the way we do things and how we expect things, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. One of the great companies today, Apple, uh, is known for its supposedly loose rules. And yet we find that Steve Jobs, the late Steve Jobs, was really a micromanager. And he really got into what people were doing. Most folks would say that's not what the general IT.com world does. They don't do things like that. Well, it's not necessarily true. So the formal structure kind of tells people what they're supposed to do and how they're supposed to do it. It talks about job descriptions and things of that nature. And it demarcates the lines of authority. And whether we're in the new workplace, which is very different than the old workplace, there are still rules. Now, we hope that the rules that are there today allow for greater flexibility than the rules that were there years ago. And I think we find that. And that's some of the complaint about, well, we have certain unions and we have to have rules and this and that and something else, and people don't like that. Yeah, well, that's not the only purpose for unions. Unions have other purposes as well. But we have to remember when those contracts are negotiated, and those contracts are signed, they're not just signed by the union, they're signed by management as well. And so management has to learn to work with the unions, and unions have to learn to work with management. So let me get off that soapbox because that kind of, we get into an adversarial type situation. Of course, unions and management sometimes are adversarial. But everybody's thinking about the big picture and moving the company forward, organization, whatever you want to call it, then everybody should be kind of on the same sheet of music in a certain way. So that's what this is. That's why we have formal structures. And the formal structures stem from two of the first four of the managerial functions, planning and organizing. And so we have to have those. Now we have a thing called vertical specialization. I don't think we see vertical specialization as much today as we used to see vertical specialization. This is hierarchical. And we have labor that is set up well, it's directed, I should say, by formal authority. And again, it's very hierarchical. And things go in this manner, as opposed to the horizontal flat outright. And notice at the bottom that you have, when you have a very hierarchical society or vertical specialization, people work in positions of increasing levels of authority. So if you just want to look at it from this standpoint, you have the line worker, and then you have the line worker's supervisor, and there probably will be a manager over that department, and then we have a middle manager, and then senior managers, and finally senior executives on up to the chief executive officer. We work with, and many organizations do work with, things called organizational charts. When I was in the military, specifically in the Army, we called these wiring diagrams. And it shows a formal structure in an organization, and it also shows lines of authority, and in some respects, although in most all, but I wanted to not make it all, but I probably is all minus, I guess is the best way to put it. It shows lines of authority. That is, who is reporting to whom, and it shows other types of working relationships besides just authority. So what we're going to look at here is figure 16.1, which you can see at the bottom of page 377 in the text. And what this says is this is a partial organizational chart for a university. Partial because it only goes so far. But notice we have the president, and the president has line relationships, or with other people, he or she, line relationships, and also staff relationships. And the line are to the vice president of administration here on the left, vice president of academic affairs, and provost. Now, I just want to tell you that most places being universities and colleges, they will have either a provost or they will have a vice president of academic affairs, VPAA. We had a provost here, and then when he retired a few years ago, the new person hired it changed the position to say vice president of academic affairs. Usually you don't have both, but I suppose you could have them. And then notice the president goes on down, has direct reports down to the college deans. But that is through the vice president of academic affairs. Then the president has staff relationships, and you can see assistant for finance programs, personal assistant, or personnel, etc. And then there's a few other ones. And then other line relationships are shown here in sort of a off green or a buffish green color, other places. So this just tells us how these relationships are set up and who is going to report to whom, etc. Now, obviously, there's reporting relationships. The vice president of administration has people reporting to him for, like the treasurer, physical plan, admissions and records, etc. Report to him or her, and then back up to the president. So we have, in this issue, we have, or this chart, figure depicting a wiring diagram chart, we have both line and staff relationships. Pardon me. Span of control is really a rather easy thing to think about. It just refers to the number of employees who report to a single supervisor or manager. And notice what the first bullet says, the direct report. When I was in the Army, we used to talk about span of control of being no more than 10 people. And I really don't know that anybody ever actually explained the reason for 10, except 10 is a very easy number. It's easy to add, multiply, divide, and subtract. And so it's an easy way to do that. Notice what the next bullet says. Because we have the thing that I'm using here to deliver this audio and video lecture, or PC, and I have some capability to do video, and the audio is built into the PC itself, we don't need as many supervisors or managers as we used to do because of communication being more instantaneous, than it was in years past. And so even though we have this, we still have some type of control. We still have some type of formal structure because we have to keep account of what goes on. And so we need to have that structure. It may not be as structured as we were used to. It may be a lot more loose than what we would like. Some people would, some people wouldn't. But we still have to have some type of structure. And I think the thing with any organization is to find out what type of structure works and to use it. Now, structure should not be stultified, and by that I mean is that people ought to be able to work around it and through it as opposed to being hemmed in by it. And so we need to think about it. And that's where we talked about flexibility before, and I hope to we'll address that a little more fully in the future. The future being sometime before we're finished with this chapter. And this is what we have in organizations. We have line units and staff units. And we've spoken about this a little bit before, and we'll do it again. The line units are the people that are the production people. They're the ones that put together the products we're going to sell. They manufacture them, assemble them, get them ready for shipping, et cetera, et cetera. And they are really in the major part of the business. The staff units are the folks that are the specialists. They provide the expertise that other ones don't have. Now, the slide down here at the bottom talks about accounting and public relations, but we would also talk about human resource administration. We would talk about engineering to some extent, possibly, and then there would be other type of things that we would have within an organization. What happens here is that the line units will ask the staff units for some help in providing expertise. And so the staff units will come down and give that to the line units, and the line units will say, okay, well, we thank you, but we're not going to follow that. And that gets the staff people aggravated. And the staff people just have to realize that they're there to give advice. They're there to provide expertise. They're there to do whatever it is those folks need them to do, absent physically doing work. And whether or not the line units decide to take their advice or not is up to the line units. Now, in a perfect world, they ought to do that. But there's no requirement. And that's what causes lots and lots of problems, because the staff guys will say, well, gals say, well, we went down and gave advice and didn't follow it. So we have to be careful about that, and ought to have good working relationships. Now we need to look at control in a probably, I would like to say, a more enlightened excuse me, I have something in my eye, a more enlightened thought process than what we've done in the past. Now, I have argued, debated, didn't argue with some of my colleagues before about using control in some of our syllabi, etc., where control is one of the 4 managerial functions. And they came back to me and said, no, wait a minute. We're not talking about putting people under somebody's thumb. No. We have to stop and think about why we have control. And one of the 4 managerial functions says we have control because we have to make sure that the processes that we use in manufacturing, particularly manufacturing, but in service and other things, that the control processes we have to tell us that what we're doing is on target. It says it's within tolerance of what we're doing. We have to have those to run to tell us. And we need to, especially in a production run, we need to have this control telling us from the beginning of the production run to the end of the production run that everything's within tolerance. And when we find out something during this production run is not within tolerance, we can stop and make sure that things get back to tolerance. So when we get to the end, we have a finished product that we can ship and sell. Other than having a couple of people standing at the end of the production line, quality control inspections, say, oh, this doesn't meet specifications, and toss it over into the waste bin. Doesn't help us do that. So what we see here is control is about not so much about setting the standards. The standards should have already been set, but we can use control to set the standards. And then we're going to measure our results, our production run, against the published standards. And we're going to take corrective action to make sure that we're staying within the tolerance. So if our tolerance is here to there, this is the high level tolerance, this being the low level tolerance, and anything within this, we can ship. And of course, the narrower it gets, the better it is. But if it's way out of whack, we can't ship that. So we need to make adjustments while we're going through the process, the production process. Instead of waiting to get to the end of the production line and say, well, this doesn't work and this doesn't work and something else doesn't work. So we've lost money in the production process and we're throwing stuff away to make scrap. Now here's our output controls, and that's just helping us along. And these output controls are defined a specific production target, but they don't tell us how to get there. So we allow the manager, the production manager in this case, to devise his or her own ways to meet the desired end state without hamstringing him or her. Now, of course, there are some guidelines we follow, et cetera, and that we make sure that this is going through. Notice what the next thing says. This is part of the management by exception. Next, we have what are known as process controls. And the slide here tells you, going to give us some parameters in which the tasks are supposed to be accomplished. And process controls, we have policies, procedures, and rules, formalization and standardization, total quality management controls. So let's look at these. Process, tell employees how to. Policies are guidelines. They are broadly stated and allow and promote individual action without getting approval. Procedures are about best practices. And rules are, well, we know what rules are. You have to follow certain rules, and you know, we can't get away from that, no matter how much the workplace has changed today, and no matter how much we've relaxed the workplace. And hopefully, in relaxing, we've made it better to come to work and more enjoyable and things of that nature. We still have to have rules to follow. There's certain things we just simply can't do, and we need to do that. So this gives us policies and procedures, which I've already talked to, and I don't need to go back over these. I've said them a little differently than what you're going to see on these this slide and the next one, but it pretty much is follows along with what the slides say. And these are the rules. And again, we have these put in place for various sundry and good and cogent reasons. And many times a rule will tell us what cannot be done, not so much what you can do. So certain things you don't want to do, and so you have to be careful about certain things. Now we come into two things that sound alike, but they're different: formalization and standardization. Formalization or guidelines allow us for less management. Notice here, it's the documentation of our rules, etc., and helps us in decision making. Standardization promotes and provides parameters, the degree of allowable range of actions, etc. So we need to think of these things as they are and being different. Formalization, these are what we've written down, our policies and procedures and things of the other ways, whereas the standardization provides parameters of what we can do and what we can't do, and hopefully standardization hopefully promotes uniformity. Now, why are we concerned about uniformity? Well, we go back to this control function that we have. We want our product to come out and be as uniform every time as possible. We know that's not going to happen. We're pretty certain that due to the varieties of humans, the resources we use, etc., that each and every product we produce will have some minor, and I stress the word minor, variation from the one that was produced right ahead of it. Hopefully that is so minimal that nobody would ever notice it. What we're concerned with is making sure that we don't have so many variations that we're putting out what is supposed to be the same product, but every one we put out is different from the one that was just produced. So that's why we have standardization, and we need to pay attention to that. And even though we have relaxed rules, we have a relaxed workforce today, and we promote familiarization in the workforce today. And I don't mean fraternization, I mean familiarization. We've tried to break down barriers between management and the rank and file worker. We still need to have standards, because if we don't have standards, we're not going to produce the type of product we want to do, product that we want to produce time after time after time after time. We are going to spend a little bit of time now talking about a concept known as total quality management. This was developed by Dr. W. Edwards Deming. I'll tell you a little story about Dr. Deming in a second. You can see the 14 points of his total quality management on page 383 in the text at figure 16.2. Dr. Deming was on General MacArthur's staff during the occupation of Japan at the end of World War II. And the old story goes is that Dr. Deming was a pest. He was a statistician, and people were complaining about what he did and what he didn't do. So MacArthur, or one of MacArthur's staffers, sent him to work with the Japanese. And Dr. Deming taught the Japanese his total quality management concepts, theories, and philosophy. And what happened about 25 years later was the Japanese started to come over and beat the American car companies, automobile manufacturers' brains out because they were producing a better quality automobile. Now, the Japanese didn't do this overnight. The first Japanese automobiles that came to the United States in the late 1950s and the early 1960s, were cheap. I don't use that word without fear of contradiction. They were cheap. They didn't hold up well. You had to take them back to a special mechanic to take care of them. There were not, you couldn't take them to your neighborhood garage and have them fixed because those people didn't know what to do, didn't have the tools, et cetera, et cetera. But they kept improving their product, and they kept working on it, adhering to these tools of total quality management, or these concepts of total quality management, these 14 principles. So they did that, and they continued to improve. I'm not going to talk about all of Dr. Deming's rules, but one I've always liked is learn a new philosophy of quality to improve every day or every system, institute modern on-the-job training, improve supervision to develop inspired leaders. There's 11 more, and you can read them. And of course, Dr. Deming is not as popular today in this country, but many of his other, there's been some add-ons to that. There's been Zero Defects, and there has been Six Sigma. There have been a few other type things. This is called process quality control to improve quality. And that's what we're after. The manufacturers are after improving quality, and if they don't, they're not going to be in business very long. Now, that's Dr. Deming. That's what he was into, and I certainly encourage you to read his points of total quality control, the 14 points. We have two theories here of hierarchy. One is centralization. The other is decentralization. Centralization simply says that decisions are made at specified levels. Now, the slide here says at higher levels, yeah, and don't think of higher levels necessarily as being all the way up the chain, but of course they could be in some cases. Now, pardon me, what you might find in many organizations is that, and going along with empowerment, decisions are moved down with some exceptions. And those exceptions are reserved to senior executive level for some, good and cogent reason, maybe like financial decisions or changing product or things of that nature. And then decentralization, again, this would be empowerment. It's talking about a little bit differently here, where authority to make decisions is given to the lowest level possible. Here are some benefits of decentralization. I'm not going to talk to all of them, but what it does say is that you're going to get greater satisfaction among the worker. You will have most likely a quicker response time. And notice the final one is a popular approach in many industries, certainly in the information management, information technology industry, the .com industry, and other industries like that. We find that to be true. Horizontal specialization. A little bit something different here. This is, notice that's a division of labor that establishes specific work units or groups within an organization. And it is spread out horizontally as opposed to vertically that we've spoken about before. And then we have this thing called functional departmentalization. And here, for the most part, we find that people are grouped together based upon skill. Now, it could be knowledge and it could be action, but my experience is it's mostly based upon skill. We talked a little bit about this before, I believe, and if we haven't, I'm going to mention it. The problem here is that people who continue to be this way can become insular. And we talked about this back when we talked about groups and teams and how they have a tendency to become insular. So we have to be careful about that. This is some advantages and disadvantages of functional specialization. You can see this slide 16.3 at page 386. Now, I don't want to talk to all of these, but I do want to speak about one or two of them. And functional specialization, we have clear task assignments. It's easy to explain, and we can take advantage of various employees' technical ability and abilities. But notice we narrow training. That's why I talked about this insular business. Boring routine jobs. Communication across technical area is complex and difficult, mostly because they don't talk to each other. They stay within their own confines. So we have to be careful about these things, that there's good and there's bad, and we need to make sure we strike a good balance here. The next we come to are what are known as divisional departments. And notice that these are grouped by some kind of commonality. Could be geography, could be product, could be clients, etc. And so we're doing things in those various manners, and we're putting things together. So we have like outside environment, that we have like inside environment. We can talk to those, hopefully. And of course, here's an example of division pattern by departmentalization. And you can see this at figure 16.4 on the next page, page 387. Here we have president, CEO, and then automotive parts division. And we have internal division, and we have financial services, et cetera, et cetera. And again, we have advantages and disadvantages. We have integration, if you will, for advantages, integration of specialized personnel. Focus on success or failure, and we can answer those. Well, what are some downsides? Duplication of effort. May give prioritization to divisional goods over the organization. And we're paying more attention to what we're doing here than what we're paying attention to how well the organization's running. This is a tail wagging a dog type thing again. And we can have conflict between divisions and fights over scarce resources. Matrix is different because it uses a little bit of both. And matrix is what a lot of people like, but there's a lot of problems with the matrix. And we need to kind of look at that a little bit. And we see the matrix on page 388, figure 16.5. And rather than talk about advantages, I mean, advantages are bringing expertise from across the spectrum in the organization, and you bring in technical people, et cetera, et cetera. So you really get a lot of synergy here. The problem is it's expensive, and you have unity of command being violated on a regular basis because the people in the matrix departmentalization have two bosses. And, you know, nobody can serve two bosses equally well. You're going to serve one well and despise the other. And so we really have to be careful about doing this because even though it may provide the expertise you're looking for, it's difficult to manage. And look at the last disadvantage you talk about. It's hard to explain to employees what they're doing and why they're doing it and how they're doing it and why they're here instead of being over there. It's just not easy to do. Coordination. Pretty simple. This talks about a set of mechanisms, if you will, that help us interact with other people in the organization. And I like to look at this as the lubricant, if you will, that helps divisions, departments within the organization coordinate with each other and function well together, interact with each other. Now, there are personal methods of coordination, and I will tell you that they're always better than anything else. It's not always easy to do. Notice it's about promoting dialogue and hopefully innovation and creativity and learning, et cetera, et cetera. And we also know that personal methods, and we're talking now about things like telephone and face-to-face and things of that nature. Not so much this medium, because you know we're at a distance here. It does a lot of good for you, but by the same token, you have to be very careful about it because it's timely and it's time-consuming and it's expensive. But then on the other hand, we have a better chance of finding out what our issues are, what problems we have. How can we not circumvent, but how can we meet these issues? How can we address them? How can we fix them? Which you don't always get in impersonal methods of coordination. Now, notice here that impersonal methods produce synergy by stressing consistency. And so we want to get everybody together. Talking here about the matrix departmentalization and management information systems for coordination, et cetera, et cetera. Yes, those are all true. I don't dismiss any of that. The problem is here when you see these things, you've lost the personal part of that. And that's an issue that we really have to pay attention to because as we talk back about in communication and collaboration in Chapter 11, being able to gauge people's verbal cues helps us know how the message is being received, whether it's being digested, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm not dismissing impersonal methods of coordination. What I'm saying is that personal is always better, although it is resource intensive. That resource means you have to go to somebody else, that personal touch type thing. And let's go back to the personal here just a second. Promoting dialogue, discussion, etc. Well, you don't have the same discussion face-to-face that you have via email or text message or etc. So it's different, and we have to figure out how to do that. We come now to the last part of our time here for chapter 16, and we talk about bureaucracy. And bureaucracy is usually something that gets people all head up about, and we don't understand it, and we say it's a lot of red tape and everything else. Well, bureaucracy was not set up for that. Look what it talks about. It talks about logic. It talks about division of labor. It talks about promotion by merit, and I think everybody would agree to that. But it also talks about administrative rule, and that's where people have the problem. And that's when we get back to these rules and procedures, that there has to be some flexibility to allow you to do things. What administrative rules and bureaucracy should tell you is, you can't do this, but everything else you can do. And too often, we get in bureaucracies, and by the way, it's not just in the federal government or state government or any other type of government. And we say, well, we can't do that. But most of the time, it doesn't say that. Mechanistic, two types of mechanistic and organic. Mechanistic is just the way it says, lockstep. And then organic promotes horizontal specialization, excuse me. There's mechanistic. I don't have to go over that again. Rules, regulations, procedures, follow them or else. And then the benefits of an organic organization. Well, you do have some benefits from this, because you will have quicker rule making, decision making, because we know where they're coming from. They're set in certain places, so you're going to be able to get that quickly because it's set in how it's going to do. So we know that. I mean, it may take a while to get to the decision, but you're not going to have a problem getting a decision made once it gets to the decision maker. That's the problem, getting it to the decision makers. The organic type allows better problem solving, because we get people where the rubber meets the road making decisions and making contact with customers, etc. We don't have senior management down our necks looking at everything we do and wondering what we're doing and why we're doing it, etc., etc. And it's good for adaptation. We're more attuned to what's going on outside the fence, outside the walls, than we would be if we were more insular in our decisions. Even though when it comes to making the decision, we're going to get a quicker decision, because once all the facts get to everybody, we'll get a decision pretty quickly, as opposed to a lot of maybe messy, participative type decision-making styles. And the best that we can get, though, really is, these are common types of bureaucracy. It's a hybrid. We have divisional firm, and then we also have a conglomerate. Conglomerate's one large firm that has a number of smaller firms underneath it. Usually the businesses are unrelated. Hybrid, divisional firm. Notice here it talks about quasi-independent divisions. Or as a conglomerate, these unrelated businesses would be independent divisions. Well, that brings us at 5:25 to the end of our chapter 16. We're probably close to 5:26. We'll take a break now until 5:31 and come back and talk about chapter 17, which governs technology. Please come back at 5:31. Thank you. Welcome back. We are now at our last chapter, chapter 17, Strategy, Technology, and Organizational Design, how to compete in a changing landscape. And we hope to be able to answer these questions as we go through this chapter. Why are strategy and organizational learning important? What is organizational design and how is it linked to strategy? How does technology influence organizational design? How does the environment influence organizational design? And finally, how should the whole organization be led strategically? Strategy is simply putting your plan into action. Notice it talks about positioning the organization in a competitive environment, etc. But you have to know where your environment is or what your environment is. You have to have a strategy to formulate based upon the environment, the resources you have, etc., and then put that strategy into action. And notice that there's a little note down here. It says strategy is ongoing. I don't disagree with that, but I would like to use the term it's evolving. Strategy is continually evolving. Our marketplaces change very rapidly. And I'll give you an example. Tide detergent made by Procter & Gamble, a Cincinnati company, Fortune 500 company, been around for a number of years, that makes the leading detergent on the market. That's globally, not just the United States, Tide detergent. And I would tell you that in my experience, Tide has probably gone through a number of changes and generations to keep it where it is. Changes, I mean, somebody would say to me and would say to you, detergent's detergent. And I would submit to you that that's probably correct. But as the environment changes, you have to be careful about what you put into the detergent. For instance, we don't use phosphates in detergents any longer because phosphates aren't considered friendly to water sources, etc. So Procter & Gamble has changed that product over a period of time, some due to regulatory requirements, others to try to attract and maintain its customer base. Put bleach and it's done this and it's done that and something else. And it's still number one, but they're still looking for ways to improve it to make it more appealing to their customer base. Strategy, we talked about it being ongoing. As again, I like to say, evolving. And notice the next one talks about a co-evolution. And then it's a pattern of decisions. Yeah, we made these decisions, and then we're going to try to roll them up into a strategy, and then put that strategy to work. And this says it's the second aspect of strategy, but it's something that we need to be thinking of. And I would mention to you, when you're going through your reading here today, tonight, tomorrow, whenever it happens to be, I hope you get a chance to watch what I'm having to say here, or watch what I'm saying here, or listen to what I'm saying, and that is to read the piece about IBM in the top part of page 401 underneath the shaded area, how IBM has changed. One thing I would say, they talk about IBM wearing blue suits, white shirts, and blue ties. I remember their salesmen. Now, don't anybody throw anything at me. 1960s was all salesmen. They wore red ties, not blue ties. At least that's what I remember. And by the way, I'm not colorblind. I do know that there's between red and blue. I can discern that there's between red and blue. I guess that's a better way to put that. But you notice what they say here, that IBM was a second to the market organization. They weren't first to the market. And they've changed that today. Yeah, IBM still makes mainframes, but IBM got out of the personal computer business because it found out that its model was outdated. IBM's model was, we're going to make computers, we'll sell them to our distributors, and then our distributors will sell them to customers that walk in the distributor's door. And while they were doing that, there was a young upstart fellow by the name of Michael Dell, who built a PC in his college dorm room. I don't know where he went to college, and then started selling these things online. You tell me how you want your computer made, manufactured, and I'll do it for you. Made them to specification. What? IBM didn't do that. And IBM was using distributors, going through, a wholesaler or a retailer. And Michael Dell was selling direct. Cut out the middleman. So IBM, after a while, realized that they could not compete in that environment any longer because the environment had changed and IBM's model could not change. Well, I say could not change. It probably could have changed, but it would have taken a long time to change that model. And so the best thing they did for them was to get out of it. Now, they still make mainframes, but they do a lot of consulting today. And they're helping people manage their information and things of that nature. And as the thing says here now, they're a cutting-edge organization, which they weren't originally. Even though IBM typewriters, and I'm a thing of the past. Some of you may not know what a typewriter is, if you're young enough, and some of you probably are. I don't think there's typewriters still in the United States. I don't think there's a typewriter repair agency left in the United States. There was one left here in Cincinnati area, and I don't think it's in business any longer, at least not for typewriters. Now, this is something that we really need to stop and think about. This is organizational learning. I think, in a way, it's not right to say that organizations learn, because organizations are constructs. They're in business because the state allows them to be in business or something else. Organizations are, of course, made up of people. It is the people within the organization that learn, and this is what we're talking about, promoting a learning organization. So we have to learn through various and sundry manners, and of course that's acquiring knowledge, that's acquiring information, or actually, like I like to say, it's acquiring raw data and turning that into information. And then also making that information useful. And talk about here about information distribution, information interpretation, which is the useful part, and then making sure that you retain that, so that you have a body of knowledge upon which to build. And if something comes up, you can search your archives and say, well, we have that. We don't have to go back and reinvent the wheel again. Pardon me. But the reason I talk about interpretation is because we're inundated every day with more information than we can possibly assimilate. And we have to be able to, and I've talked about this before, about separating the wheat from the chaff. These things I have here on the left side of my desk or left side of my computer, whatever you want to say, are going to give me the greatest return. Other ones over on the right side aren't going to give me a great return. I'll let those sit around for a while. When we get all this information, we have to be able to make sense of it. And we have to be able to use it in a way that's going to give us the biggest return for our investment. And don't think of investment necessarily being dollars and cents. It's time. And we have to make sure that we're going to be able to get that. Now, how do we learn? Well, one of the ways we learn is what's up here on the slide now, and it's called mimicry. And we can think of mimicry as simply as the first word there says below mimicry, copying. If we have found someone else has done something well, why do we have to go and do it our way just because it's ours? Take it and use it. And we use a document here in the university to help instructors develop syllabi and figure out ways to make sure we get the right amount, not necessarily the right amount, a sufficient amount of student contact time. We do it through what I'm doing now, lectures and lecture notes are already there, and PowerPoint slides, and through interactive case studies and things of that nature. Document we use, we got from somebody else. One of our former associate provosts got the document from an organization she belonged to, and she passed it on to me, and I got it to the right people, and we've massaged it a little bit. And I think when we cite where we got it, we did. I don't know if we're still doing that. I think we do. But it caused us from going through a lot of gyration on our own to come up with what we eventually probably would have come up with anyway. And so if we do that, notice here, what are the benefits? Gives us workable solutions, cut down on the number of decisions we have to make, and because somebody else has done it, and because that was successful, we now have legitimacy and people will accept it because it worked for somebody else. And there's anything wrong with that. It's kind of, if you want to look at it, it's kind of like repetition. And I'm going to give you some old Latin that I knew years ago. It's called repetitio est mater studiorum. Repetition is the mother of the student. And so we're repeating things and we're learning. And there's nothing wrong with it. And vicarious learning kind of picks up on that because notice what it says here. Capturing the lessons of others' experiences and bringing them into our own. Capitalizing on that. Learning from that. And very, very, very important. And we do this all the time. We just don't think about it. We can also do things like scanning. Pretty simple to think about. We're looking beyond our horizons, or maybe looking beyond our nearsightedness, if you will, moving beyond that and bringing what we learned back. Obviously, we're going to bring back things that are going to work, and the things that aren't going to work, we're going to not so much discard them, but just say we're not going to use them. And then grafting is exactly think of a skin graft. You're taking good skin from a certain part of your body. I'm using upper arm because that's used fairly frequently. And you're putting that skin at a place that needs it. I'm going to say here on your chest. And then if you put it in the right place, it's going to grow back and you're going to have skin again where you didn't have skin. That's exactly what we're talking about. Now, this particular thing talks about avenues for knowledge retention. Notice the first thing that's there, it's employees. We have to remember that. One of the things we make a mistake with is not asking the employee who walks out the door for whatever reason. But let's hopefully say, lack of a better, for the sake of the argument, excuse me, I'll get to it in a second, that the person is leaving under good graces. Now, let's say he or she's leaving an apartment, going another place, or they're being promoted someplace else, or they decide to leave for another job, but they're leaving on good graces, or they decide to retire. We don't always ask them for things that they could give us, and it's something we really need to do. We don't do that. Obviously, documents, information systems that we have, archives, et cetera, et cetera. Organizational design is just choosing and implementing a structure that you want to have for your organization. We will find, and this should come as no surprise to anybody, that small organizations will have a simple structure. They will, because they don't have as many layers of workers and supervisors and managers, etc. So they'll want to be something that's relatively simple. And I kind of mentioned this before. Again, this is where we're talking here about size. So we have all sorts of things. Those are organizational design in the middle. Of course, it's influenced by our strategy. And we have to remember that. The strategy is going to drive this. And then we have, obviously, the environment, both internal and external, operations, information technology, and then size, which we talked about before. All these things are impacting organizational design. We have to be careful with organizational design and make sure that it meets the needs of the organization. If you have something that's too unwieldy, it's going to take you too long maybe to get information back, etc. Not something you want to do, not something you want to contemplate or even implement. Again, organizational size, and I think we probably cannot overemphasize that. Notice at the top here, it talks about larger organizations having a number of core operations, not core competencies, operations that they have to make sure are working well. Small firm is obviously directly influenced, or more directly influenced by both core operations and technology, and that's why a smaller firm will have a much simpler design. And we're going to get to that on our next slide here, and that is a simple design. One or two ways of specialization. Vertical specialization may be best in a small organization because it doesn't have as many things to do. Notice here what it said. Emphasizes levels of supervision without elaborate formal control mechanisms. Now, I added the word control because that's what it means. So we don't have that, and that's why we want to think about in a smaller firm having something that's simple, easy to assemble, easy to put together, and we're not encumbered with lots of other things that are very unwieldy and very difficult to manage. There are two things on this particular slide operations technology, and then information technology. Operations technology is everything required to produce a good or a service. Now, operations technology, operations management probably is a better term than technology, although operations management uses a number of technologies. We used to have a thing called production management. We've gone away from that to embrace operations management and now obviously operations technology. So it's everything we need to be able to create a good or service. Talks about the resources, the inputs, and obviously resources are humans, our employees, and then we have to have special resources. We need to have the right resources to produce what it is we want to produce, and then it's the techniques, it's the machinery, it's the equipment, it's everything we need to do that. Information technology is a little bit different than that because notice it's a combination of things as well. The combination up above for operations technology as well. But information technology is also using machines, equipment, etc. But the end part of that is it is going to put out information, and then it's going to translate that information, interpret that information into useful knowledge. Or if it's not useful knowledge, it's going to translate it into a useful document that people can do, that people can use to make decisions, etc. So look at these two as complementary. One is not exclusive to the other. One focuses on production, the other focuses on information. Now we have two views of technology here, and you can see these explained to you on page 408 and 409. We have Thompson's view of technology and then Woodward's view of technology. Thompson talks about classification according to, as the slide says, degree of specialization or specification, and then how much interdependence you need, how much each is dependent upon the other. And he says that we have three types, and by the way, there's some mentioned here. We have the intensive technology. We have mediation technology, or mediating, excuse me, and then long-link technology. Intensive is uncertainty, need, expects, and a lot. Notice it's uncertainty, how to produce what you're supposed to produce, and requires the assistance. That's where that needs experts, and a lot requires assistance of people, of specialists, and so you need a lot of those folks. Mediating technology links parties that want to become interdependent. So take two disparate but unrelated entities and bring them together. And the long link is assembly line, if you will, but it has to have some type of control because it's broken down into sequential steps. That's what long link technology is. Thompson views it differently than an assembly line, but that's exactly what an assembly line is. Assembly line is old technology. This is newer technology, but it's based in some respects on old concepts, or at least to my way of thinking it is. Now Woodward, John Woodward, kind of talks a little bit to what to what Thompson had to say, and she talks about three different types. She talks about small batch production, mass production, and then continuous process technology. Small batch, think of this as craft work, made to order type work. The customer gives you his or her specifications and it's taken care of in that manner. Notice what's down at the bottom, tailor-made suits. We don't have as many tailors in this country as we used to have. Now, if you go to big cities like New York, they're going to find a lot of tailors up there. And they make a suit for the person. And, of course, there's extra money paid for that. It's not like going to Men's Warehouse or some other place and buying a suit off a rack. It's a lot different. Then she has the mass customization or mass production. That's same as long linked details. Only a few products are produced through assembly line. Again, old technology, but still around. We've not completely done away with that. And then continuous process technology. Here we use a lot of automation, and very few products are made at that time. Now we have a thing called adhocracy. I think I lost something here. Let me get out. I did. I've skipped a slide. I beg your pardon. We have a type of bureaucracy. Excuse me, don't mean to use that term. We have a type of organizational design here. It's called adhocracy. And adhocracy actually is a decentralized way of doing things. You can see the definition on page 409 in the margin. And uses, again, horizontal specialization, etc. And I want to speak to just a few of these. Notice that it starts out at the beginning that it has few rules, policies, and procedures. So it tells us that we're in the new workplace. By the way, this was developed by Henry Mintzberg, who's a management guru. And the last I knew, he was at McGill University in Toronto. I'm fairly certain that's where McGill is. But anyway, well-respected management guru. A lot of decentralization. Horizontal specialization, like we mentioned here earlier. Very few levels of management. And virtually no formal controls. Now, I think that we need to stop and think about no formal controls, or virtually no formal controls. We really have to be careful about that because we talked about production and we need to make sure that we're producing products that meet specification. If we're producing products and trying to sell them to the public and they don't meet specification, we've not done our job very well. So we need to be careful about that. Now, Mintzberg says that adhocracy is useful when you have difficult problems that they're not easy to define. Not easy to define and not easy to solve. And notice that the tasks have great variation, and there are many exceptions. So, I'm not sure exactly what we want to call adhocracy. I think it's probably looking at something where we don't have definition. Perhaps it's going back to the classical decision-making model versus the behavioral decision-making model, and thinking somewhere along in that line. We don't have clear defined parameters here. We don't have a lot of clarity, maybe a lot of ambiguity, and so we could have something like this. But we have to stop and think about some of this. And notice what it says here at the bottom of this thing. It places a premium on professionalism and coordination. And here I'll go on to talk about firms using temporary task forces and things of that nature. And we find that what Mintzberg is saying is that those things are actually elements of adhocracy, or they lend themselves to elements of adhocracy. There's one thing here I want to mention to you that you do see here on the end of this bottom part of the slide, and it talks about contract with consulting firms to provide creative problem identification. One of the problems that we have with consulting firms is this. Often a consulting firm is not given all the parameters that it needs to be given. So it doesn't address everything that needs to be addressed because some information has been withheld from it. The second thing is that a consulting firm may come in and tell you how to do something, but the consulting firm is not going to do that for you. That's not their job. That's not why you hired them. And so you need to work with the consulting firm to make sure that you're understanding what they're giving you. Often a consultant, and by the way, this is not a slam at consulting firms. Don't take this to be that way. I don't mean it to be, but often the consulting firms will come up, they'll identify the problem and the solution, and they'll write a report. And they'll come in and they'll brief the CEO or whoever needs to be briefed, and they'll leave the report and everything else. And the problem is the people on the other side don't understand what's being told to them. So that's why I'm saying that if a consulting firm comes in and they devise creative solutions, etc., somebody needs to be there to go through it with a consulting firm to understand what's being done and take that in so it now belongs to the organization. It doesn't belong to the consulting firm. It's not just part of the consulting firm's final report. It has to be ingested, swallowed, and lived in the organization. And as I'm saying, that too often consulting firms don't get enough information, and so they don't provide as good an answer as they could because they don't have the information. They weren't given it in the first place. So that's a problem. And then, like I say, they will produce something, final report, a how-to thing maybe. People don't understand it. And so it's virtually not, I won't say it's virtually useless, but it's virtually no good. And that's why I'm saying you really have to get in with a consulting firm and make sure that you understand what they're doing. Not a slam on consulting firms. I want to make sure that you understand that. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that too often there's not intercommunications between the two folks, between the firm that hires and the firm that comes in and does the consulting work. All right, let's move on here to why IT makes a difference. Now, notice what the first thing on the slide here says. It's in red. It's a partial substitute for operations, process controls, methods of coordination, and it can provide strategic capability. I don't like to use the word partial substitute. We should say it's a complementary piece to. If we start thinking about something as being a partial substitute for, we will move it to be a permanent substitute for, when in fact it may not be capable of being a permanent substitute. So we ought to use information technology as a complement. we ought to use information technology to broaden our horizons, our scope, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, as opposed to saying it's a partial substitute. I think that's dangerous thinking. Now, you know, I didn't write this textbook, and I don't claim to be as good experts as these folks are. Maybe I'm not even an expert. But I think we need to think about how we visualize things and how we internalize what we're saying to make sure that we're getting what it is we want to get out of something. And when we say partial substitute, I think we're making a mistake. But that's my point. Some of the things we can use for IT, and we need to think about IT, is because it does displace or takes away things that are routine, mundane, and very repetitious. One of the reasons you call an organization today and you get an automated operator is because that takes precious time from somebody to do that. And so if we can use an automated operator and we have a program to transfer telephone calls, then we should be able to speed up some other type things we want to do, like customer service. That does not mean to say, and I'm not saying that we need to have all the automation we have. In some cases we have, and we don't use it very wisely. But we can do that. We can also use information technology to replace process controls, etc. Now, in saying that, say replace them, but we're using them now in place of. That's the same as replacement, yes, but we're not saying that they're taking away other functions. We're just using this much differently than what we used to use it, and we're using it to be smarter and better at noticing our process controls, etc. Well, we know that information technology can help us do a lot of things. Computer-aided design, in many cases, helps simplify decision making and fosters, in many cases, employee empowerment, among other things we talked about here on this slide. So yeah, we need to harness information technology so that it gives us the biggest bang for our buck. But when in saying that, we need to use information technology to support us as opposed to being a slave to it. Now, I've been reading a good bit of information lately, some in New York Times and some other places, where we're making robots, if you will, and information technology smart enough to fool humans and to make them more human-like and so on and so forth. And I suspect as we move through this and we do more refining, etc., that we are going to find more and more information technology doing certain things to humans, etc. I don't expect to be around when that happens, but I think it's something that we have to pay attention to and make sure we're doing it in a proper way. Too often what happens is that technology gets way far in advance of human thought and gets far in advance of humans, and then humans are playing catch up. And it's very difficult to do that. And we may come to a time when we have outsmarted ourselves. So we need to, and I'm not into that business. I'm not an information technology person, and certainly don't know the inner workings of information technology very well at all. But we need to be careful about how we go about doing these things. And that's not to say anybody's out doing things that are nefarious. What happens is these things go very quickly, and when they do, then we can't put the genie back in the bottle. Give you an example. we developed an atomic bomb. And we had no idea what the fallout from the use of atomic energy would be. And so we have to be careful about what we do. Atomic energy has been around for 80 years or so. Well, not quite that long, if you want to look at the first explosion atomic bomb, which would be 70 years come this August. But we have to be very careful about that. A virtual organization. Now, we've talked about this before. A virtual organization is what we know, and this is, notice it says here, it's an ever-shifting number of organizations that get together to pool their resources, it's a very interesting concept. And notice that there has to be mutual trust amongst these companies, otherwise they don't do well and don't perform well, etc., don't get the synergy that they're looking for to be able to move to what they consider to be the next step. Now, this is asking us how the environment influences organizational design. We have two to look at here. We have the general environment, and then we have the specific environment. The general environment, and we've talked about before. Remember these people, and we talked about them early on, of being stakeholders. Economics, cultural, legal, political. And those are found within the area that the organization operates, and they are outside the organization. Pardon me. External environment, called general environment here, and the organization does not control that. The specific environment, to some extent, the organization controls. And here it talks about the owners of the organization, stockholders if it's a publicly traded organization, people who are suppliers, sell you the resources that you're going to use, your distributors, government agencies to some extent, yes, and then competitors. Now, remember I said the specific environment the organization controls. Obviously, it will not control the government, and it will not control competitors, but it can, if it has the right type of leadership, atmosphere, product, etc., it can control the competitor because the competitor is playing catch up, and this is the market. You can think of this organization as being the market leader, and if you're the market leader, you can pretty much determine what's going to happen, what's going to get sold, how much it's going to get sold for, etc., etc. And of course, you have to have a structure design, if you will, that is going to be ameliorative of that type of environment. So here we know that we have three things here, according to this influence, how the environment influences. There's uncertainty. We know that because we don't control what's outside the walls and the fences. There is some interdependence because we do depend on those people. They depend upon us. We have to make some reciprocity here, if you will. And then we have this richness that we have to think about. And what is environmental richness? Notice what it says here, that when the economy is growing, and I'd like to use the word expanding because I think that's a truer picture of what we're saying here. Yes, growing is expansion. I just think expanding is a better way to say that. Environment is better when things are better, when there's expansion, when individuals are improving their living standards and our education standards and things of that nature. and in general, when there is prosperity. And obviously, we have the reverse of that when we don't have expansion within the economy. Now, this particular slide talks about environmental interdependence. And what it notice here is talking about getting people outside the organization to kind of interface with you. And getting those people who are outside to be on your governing boards, or conversely, pardon me, having your people serving on governing boards outside your walls. So you get a kind of a symbiosis here of you helping them and them helping you. And then you want to have a staff that's set up to handle various and sundry external groups. These can be your public relations people. It can be people who report directly to the president and CEO, however that's set up. But in this fashion, you're getting the best here. You're not leaving things out there to be alone. And companies do try to influence policy. They do try to influence things in the way laws are crafted, etc. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. Of course, we citizens have to be careful to make sure that those policies that are being helped craft by industry don't trample on the rights of individual citizens. I'll give you a good example. There is a lawsuit, federal lawsuit being filed by the Des Moines, Iowa Water Department, for lack of a better term, against 3 counties in Iowa that they say are allowing their farmers to put too much nitrate, too much fertilizer on their fields, and it's causing too much nitrate to get into the Des Moines water system. They have about 500,000 customers, and it costs them more money to do that. So what I'm talking about here is that it's a federal lawsuit. But suppose that the Des Moines water folks went to the legislature and started talking to the legislature about this. Now you have Iowa's a big farming state, big agricultural state. And so they would be trying to influence that and have to make sure that there's a balance struck there. And that's what I'm talking about here. We have to be careful about that. Obviously, there are people who are big players, but the big players can't trample on the rights of the small players. And of course, what this talked about, the article talked about yesterday, there are smaller farmers. And now, small farmer may have 500-600 acres that he or she could plant. And somebody would say, well, that's not a small farmer. Well, when you compare them to Archer Daniels Midland and Cargill and some of the mega farmers, it is a small farm. Environmental uncertainty and volatility, you just have to be able to respond to that. And organic means that an organization is nimble and adaptable and flexible. All words that are probably pretty similar, but I want to try to make that emphasis that that's what we're talking about here. You have to be, we face an uncertain world on a daily basis. Yeah, we know that with some certainty, some things are going to rise, are going to occur. We have a fair amount of certainty that we'll see the sun come up in the east, and even though we know it doesn't, we're rolling around the sun, and set in the west, and a few other type things. But we face a lot of uncertainty on a daily basis, and that's what this is talking about. And organizations have to be prepared to meet that uncertainty. What this particular slide says here is that we need to develop networks to intercommunicate with each other, things of that nature, co-evolve by altering our environment. That's not an easy thing to do, but what we're saying here is making the environment friendly to be able to do business. Now, that does not mean to say, and I'm not meaning to say, to change laws to allow people to do things that we won't want them to do, to pollute and things of that nature. No, but you can do things by altering the environment to make the environment more friendly, outside environment as well as the inside environment. So you have to manage networks if you're able to get into a network, and then develop alliances. Now, American companies have a lot of problems with this because we have anti-competition laws and things of that nature. So you have to make sure when you're doing that that you're not breaking laws that exist on the books, et cetera, et cetera. So those are important considerations. This talks about interfirm alliances. We have things like joint ventures and things of that nature. And yeah, there are some, and there's still some going on in this country. General Motors and Toyota have had some alliances over joint ventures, a better way to say that, over a period of years. I think they have another one now, but I'm not really too sure. And we notice we find this is often used in the high technology industry. What I'd say here is we have anti-competitive laws in the United States. And so companies that get into this have to be careful to make sure that they're not trampling on their competition. As long as it's not anti-competitive, it's certainly okay. This is simply, as far as I'm concerned, leading by linking to the revision, to the challenges. The challenges are different in production, administration, etc. We have to be sure that we're thinking about things like, notice here, top management teams as a group are important to strategic leadership. So we need to think about linking things together here. And you're leading the whole organization, not just part of it. So there are challenges, not just for the organization, but for individuals, etc. So there has to be a group set up or a team set up to address these challenges on a frequent basis, perhaps on an everyday basis. Here's some more challenges that are faced. Cognitive challenges, the ability to perceive differences. Maybe you like to say this, to see the different shades of gray. The world is not made black and white. I think we all know that. And then we have behavioral. That's the ability to change depending upon the situation, and seeing what is around and being able to adapt to those types of things and change it as we need to change them, and as we see best that they need to be changed. Composition of top management can alter choices made, and they can do this a number of things. Collective nature, temperament, outlook, interaction. If they can promote things by doing things in that nature and in that fashion. So we have to think about that. Top management teams can have major influence on how an organization operates in terms of shared culture. Remember, we talked about culture back in chapter 15. Decision making. And how decisions are made, etc. Does everything have to go all the way to the top, or can it be made at the lowest possible level? Better to make it down here if you can. Ethics, it has to be a sound foundation of ethical behavior every day. And we can't change that. It needs to work in that fashion. Now this is the perspective on strategic leadership developed by Boyle and Oyberg. And notice we have three things we have to talk about here. Absorptive capacity, capacity to change, and managerial wisdom. Absorptive capacity simply is like a sponge. It's the ability to be able to learn. Adaptive, pretty easy. Ability to change. And, change is difficult. But when you can see that it needs to be done, it needs to be done. And then managerial wisdom, and ability to perceive variations. Again, this back to this shades of gray and variations in the environment, and then making decisive action as it needs to be made. And finally, organizational competence leading to strategic leadership, and this is exactly what we've talked about here in the last slide: absorptive capacity, adaptive capacity, and managerial wisdom. And perhaps I want to say one's more than the other one, but the managerial wisdom is very important because the manager, senior executive, simply has to be able to make the right decisions and be able to carry them forth. Not always have to make the right decision every day, but there are times that they have to be made, and he or she must have the ability to see what's good, to know the alternatives, the consequences of each alternative, and make the right decision. Well, we're at 6:27. We spent the last 2 academic hours talking here. This is our last audio and video lecture. I hope they've been beneficial to you. If they have been, let me know. If they haven't been, let me know that too. And I look forward to getting your final assignments and reading your final papers. So thank you for your attention, and good night.